Grand Ole Opry legend Stringbean and his wife were murdered in their home back in 1973.
To the millions who watched, he was Stringbean, the lanky, lovable comedian with an infectious smile and legendary banjo skills. He was a living bridge to the earliest days of country music, a man who seemed to carry the gentle, homespun spirit of the mountains with him wherever he went. On stage, he played the fool, but in reality, he was a quiet, disciplined man who cherished the simple life. He and his wife, Estelle, lived in a small, secluded cabin, far from the glitz of Nashville, content with their garden, their friends, and the quiet rhythm of country life. But on a cold November night in 1973, all the laughter stopped. The beloved country star and his wife were found brutally murdered in their home, sparking a frantic search for their killers. For years, the full, chilling story of what happened that night remained elusive. Now, the mystery is solved, and the truth is not good. David Aikman, the man the world knew as Stringbean, was born into the rolling hills of Annville, Kentucky, in 1916. He grew up in a world shaped by both music and hardship. His father was a banjo player who filled local dances with the lively sounds of the mountains, and young David was captivated. He famously made his first banjo out of a shoebox and some thread. At just 12 years old, he traded a pair of prized bantam chickens for a real banjo, and from that moment on, the instrument rarely left his hands, but passion didn't pay the bills, especially during the Great Depression. Like many young men of his era, Aikman joined the Civilian Conservation Corps, a New Deal program that put men to work. It was hard labor, but it instilled in him a work ethic and a profound sense of frugality that would last his entire life. It was also during these years that he watched as neighbors and friends lost their life savings in bank failures. The experience left a permanent mark on him, creating a deep distrust of financial institutions, a conviction that would have unimaginably tragic consequences decades later. His musical talent couldn't be contained. He entered a local talent contest judged by a musician named Asa Martin, won, and was invited to join Martin's band. During one of their first shows, Martin forgot the lanky young man's name on stage and, thinking on his feet, introduced him as Stringbean because of his tall, thin build. The name stuck, becoming his identity for the rest of his career. He started out as just a musician, but it didn't take long for everyone to notice his natural comedic timing. When another performer was a no-show one night, he was pushed into the spotlight as a comic. He had a gift for it. He could tell stories and deliver punchlines with a deadpan expression that made audiences roar with laughter. This combination of authentic, old-time banjo playing and homespun humor was his ticket to the big time. His break came in 1942 when he caught the ear of the father of bluegrass himself, Bill Monroe. Aikman landed a spot as an early and influential banjo player in Monroe's legendary band, the Bluegrass Boys, cementing his place in country music history. He played in the old-time, clawhammer style, a rhythmic technique that predated the three-finger roll made famous by his eventual successor, Earl Scruggs. While with Monroe, he fully developed his Stringbean persona, adopting his signature costume, an absurdly long shirt tucked into a pair of short blue jeans belted around his knees. The outfit created the comical illusion of a man with an impossibly long torso and stubby little legs, a visual gag that was instantly memorable. 1945 was a huge year for him. He married Estelle Stanfill, who would be his partner in every sense of the word for the next 28 years. That same year, he was invited to become a member of the most prestigious institution in country music, the Grand Ole Opry. On that stage, he became a star. He also forged a lifelong friendship with another banjo player and comedian, Louis "Grandpa" Jones. They were kindred spirits who worked together, toured together, and eventually became next-door neighbors. Their bond was so close, they were like family. Despite his growing fame, Stringbean remained defiantly unchanged by success. He and Estelle lived a simple, frugal life in a small, rustic cabin. It was their sanctuary, surrounded by woods where he loved to hunt and fish. Their only real indulgences were a color television and a brand new Cadillac each year, a peculiar luxury, given that Stringbean himself never learned to drive. It was Estelle who drove him to every show, their Cadillac a familiar sight on the road to the Opry. On stage, he was the lovable fool, but at home, he was quiet, thoughtful, and content. Estelle once remarked that they could leave a bucket of money on their porch and it would still be there when they returned. It was a reflection of the trust and innocence that defined their lives. That idyllic existence went national in 1969 with the premiere of Hee Haw. The country-themed variety show was a ratings juggernaut, and Stringbean, alongside his friend Grandpa Jones, became one of its most beloved stars. His deadpan one-liners from the Scarecrow Patch brought him a level of fame he had never imagined. He was no longer just an Opry star, he was a household name, but with that fame came whispers. The stories about Stringbean's distrust of banks, once just local gossip, began to spread. People in the music industry talked about how he was paid in cash and likely kept large sums of it hidden in his little cabin. The rumor wasn't malicious, just a quirky fact about a famously eccentric star. But in the wrong ears, a quirky fact can sound like an invitation. And on a cold night in November 1973, two men decided to accept it. The evening of Saturday, November 10, 1973, began like any other for David and Estelle Aikman. They made the familiar drive from their cabin to the Grand Ole Opry. On the air that night, host Tex Ritter introduced him, saying, "He's playing all over the country, and he doesn't work for his old price anymore. Give a hand to Stringbean." Stringbean took the stage and did what he did best. He played his banjo, sang songs, and shared his gentle humor with the adoring audience. No one could have known they were witnessing the final performance of a legend. After the show, he and Estelle greeted friends backstage and made plans with Grandpa Jones to go grouse hunting the next morning. It was a perfectly ordinary end to a perfectly ordinary night, but while Stringbean was on stage, a sinister scene was unfolding back at their dark, empty cabin. Two cousins, John F. Brown and Marvin Douglas Brown, had broken in. They were acting on the rumors that the funny man from TV kept a fortune hidden on his property. They tore the cabin apart, searching desperately for the cash hoard they were sure existed. Frustrated, they didn't flee. Instead, they decided to wait. In a chilling detail that would later emerge from their confessions, they turned on Stringbean's own radio and listened to the live Opry broadcast, using it to time the Aikmans' return. Sometime after midnight, the Aikmans' Cadillac pulled into the driveway. As Estelle parked the car, something must have seemed wrong to Stringbean. He grabbed his .22 caliber pistol before walking toward his front door. He stepped inside and was immediately confronted. There was a struggle, and one of the cousins, John Brown, raised his gun and shot David Stringbean Aikman dead on the floor of his own home. Outside, Estelle heard the gunshot. She must have known instantly that something terrible was happening. She didn't run towards the house, she ran away, down the driveway, screaming for her life. But there was no one to hear her. One of the men chased her down. As she begged for mercy, he shot her in the back of the head. The killers, their hands now stained with blood, did one last frantic search. They took what little they could find, a chainsaw, some firearms, and about $250 they found in Stringbean's pockets. They had committed a double murder for less money than most people carry on a weekend trip. Unbeknownst to them, they had missed thousands. True to their Depression-era caution, Stringbean and Estelle had over $5,700 in cash sewn into secret pockets in their clothing. In their panic, the killers missed it entirely. They fled, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable horror. The next morning, Grandpa Jones drove the short distance to his friend's cabin for their hunting trip. The property was eerily quiet. As he approached the house, he made a gruesome discovery. Lying in the front yard, covered in frost, was the body of Estelle Aikman. Panicked, Grandpa Jones ran to the cabin door. He pushed it open and saw his best friend, his stage partner, his neighbor, lying dead on the floor. The news spread through Nashville like a shockwave. Friends and fellow Opry members, horrified and disbelieving, began to swarm the property. The murder of Stringbean and Estelle Aikman wasn't just a crime, it was an attack on the heart of country music. A community built on trust had been violated in the most brutal way imaginable. In its place, a cold, terrifying fear began to take root. The innocence was gone. The investigation began with a community in shock and a police force under immense pressure. The victims were beloved public figures. The brutality of the crime sent a tremor of fear through Nashville. Country music stars, who had long lived openly among their fans, were suddenly confronted with their own vulnerability. Acting Police Chief Joe Casey led the investigation. The motive was clearly a robbery gone wrong, a fact supported by the rumors of Stringbean's hidden cash. But the killers had been sloppy. They had left behind evidence and, more importantly, they would soon begin to make mistakes. The break in the case came from old-fashioned police work. The suspects, John and Marvin Brown, were cousins with existing criminal records. Almost immediately after the murders, they started drawing attention to themselves by spending unusual amounts of money. Whispers began to circulate, and those whispers quickly reached law enforcement. The most critical piece of evidence, however, came from a grieving friend. Investigators showed several stolen firearms to Grandpa Jones, hoping he might recognize them. He did. One of the guns stood out. It was one he himself had given to Stringbean as a gift. It was an irrefutable link between the suspects and the victim's home. With the evidence mounting, police arrested John and Marvin Brown. In the trial that followed, the cousins turned on each other. Each man blamed the other for firing the fatal shots. Marvin Brown eventually admitted to killing Stringbean, but insisted that John Brown was the one who had chased down and murdered Estelle. John Brown claimed he was so intoxicated he couldn't even remember being there. His wife, however, testified that her husband had confessed to her, saying, "We went to rob Stringbean and they're dead now." Under Tennessee's felony murder rule, the finger-pointing was legally irrelevant. Because the deaths occurred during a burglary, both men were equally guilty of murder, regardless of who pulled the trigger. The trial was a spectacle. Roy Acuff, the king of country music, even broke the Opry's rule against on-stage politics to call for the reinstatement of the death penalty in response to the murders. The jury needed little time to reach a verdict. Both John Brown and Marvin Douglas Brown were found guilty and sentenced to 2 life sentences. The mystery of who killed Stringbean and Estelle Aikman was solved. But the resolution brought little comfort. The trial had laid bare the senseless greed that had driven the crime. The killers weren't criminal masterminds. They were just 2 young men who believed a foolish rumor and were willing to kill for a payday that never materialized. The verdict closed the legal chapter. But the emotional wounds were far from healed. The convictions brought a sense of justice, but they couldn't undo the profound damage. The murders left an indelible scar on the soul of country music, fundamentally altering its culture. Before that night, Nashville's biggest stars lived as neighbors, not as untouchable celebrities. After the murders, that all changed. Grandpa Jones was so shaken that he moved out of state for a time. Other stars began building fences and installing security systems, retreating into private communities. It was the end of an innocence, a forced transition from a close-knit community to a more guarded, modern entertainment industry. The tragic irony of the crime hung heavy over the case. The Browns had killed 2 people for a pittance, completely missing the thousands of dollars the Aikmans had on them. But the ultimate symbol of their failure came more than 2 decades later. In 1996, the new owner of the Aikman cabin was doing renovation work. Behind a loose brick in the chimney, he discovered another of Stringbean's hiding places. Stashed away was approximately $20,000 in cash. The money, however, had been ravaged by time and rodents, rendered almost entirely unusable, a rotting testament to their violent and pointless greed. Marvin Douglas Brown died of natural causes in prison in 2003. John Brown, however, became what was described as a model prisoner. He found religion and maintained a clean disciplinary record. He repeatedly came up for parole, and each time, he was denied, thanks in large part to campaigns from the country music community. Why should they turn him loose? He cold-bloodedly killed 2 friends of ours, fellow Opry member Gene Shepard stated bluntly, but time wore on. In April 2014, John A. Brown, then 64 years old, came before the parole board for the 6th time. "I can't undo anything to change my past," he told them. "I've committed the last 40 years to changing my life." On October 15, 2014, despite passionate objections, the board voted to grant John A. Brown parole. After serving 41 years, the man who shot Stringbean Aikman and hunted down his wife was set to be a free man. The decision was met with outrage. The mystery was solved, the killers were caught, but in the end, one of them walked free. He was released in November 2014. Stringbean Aikman's legacy is a dual one. He's remembered as a comedic genius and a beloved star who was a living link to the roots of country music. But his name is also forever linked to the crime that took his life and shattered the peaceful world he represented. His murder serves as a dark benchmark in Nashville's history, a cautionary tale about the dangers of fame and the fragility of trust. The truth of what happened on that cold November night is not good. It reveals a senselessness that is impossible to comprehend, and it ends not with perfect closure, but with a lingering sense of loss, for the lives taken, and for the innocence that was lost with them. The impact of Stringbean's murder is still felt in Nashville today. What are your thoughts on this case, and the parole of one of the killers? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more in-depth looks into historical mysteries.